So today I thought it was probably important for me to share a story about myself that most people probably don't know, but I think as the story progresses, you'll probably realize why I'm telling it and how it's very salient given recent news and videos, or a video that's come out recently. Uh, so back in 2009, when I was 16, my family was living in New Orleans again because of Hurricane Ike that had Galveston. So we went to New Orleans that year to live. And that night, my mom asked me to go to the pharmacy, Walgreens, to pick up my brother and sister's prescription medication. So I went out to do that. Pretty standard thing for me to do. Had a driver's license. And as I was coming back home, I got pulled over. And as I got pulled over, my first thought was like, "What did I do wrong? Didn't feel like I did anything." And I got pulled over like on the corner from my house, basically. So I got pulled over, and so my immediate thought was, well, you pulled over, you're black and you're a man, so you probably shouldn't do anything that will warrant you getting shot. So I pulled over, didn't turn the car off, just sat there with both my hands on the steering wheel. And I look out the driver's side view mirror, and I see the officer get out with his gun drawn, pointed at me. And then look on the other mirror, and I see that officer also get out with his gun drawn, pointed at me. And obviously, internally, anyone would be terrified if they see police officers walking toward them with their guns drawn. But I think what added to my terror and suspense was the fact that I felt like I didn't do anything wrong. So I didn't understand, one, why I was being pulled over, and two, why they had the guns drawn, and three, why they were pointed at me. But I knew that if I did anything that they felt like was out of the ordinary, my life would be on the line. So all I could do was just sit there, stare forward, wait till they got up to the window, and any action that I did would be in their line of sight, and they couldn't speculate about what I was doing and take action based on speculation. They came up to the window, asked for license, registration, gave all that stuff over, which I had. And my cat's pawing at the screen door, Gibson. But I gave all that stuff over. They came back, told me everything was okay and I could go. And I asked them, like, what did I get pulled over for? And they told me I ran a stop sign, which obviously, I know I did not run a stop sign. And they said the stop sign that I ran, and if they were telling the truth, it was impossible for them to tell me I ran that stop sign, because the angle that they would have had to see me from, that they came from, would have been obscured. And when I checked that point of view, there was no cop car over there. So they didn't have the authority to say, or the perspective to say that I ran a stop sign, but they did anyway, obviously. And so some of you might also be thinking, like, well, even if you did run a stop sign, what was the point of them approaching your vehicle with their guns drawn? And I think that gets to the critical part of kind of this story from my life, is that when you're a black man in America, for better or worse, and usually for worse, there's no better to the situation. You're almost always perceived as a threat unless you make overt actions to not seem as a threat. So I think for whatever reason they decided to pull me over, maybe it was just racial profiling. I doubt they had any actual reason to pull me over. They pulled over what they saw was a large black man. And in their mind, a large black man is a threat, and they have to approach that situation with extreme caution. And extreme caution in that predicament, in their mind, means approach it with your guns drawn, because you may be entering a life or death situation. Obviously, anyone that's ever met me, that's known me in person, has never seen anything like that from me that would make them think Elliot might kill that person. Like, that's just not something that I don't think ever has crossed a person's mind. And even if they did, they meant it in a very metaphorical way, in a hyperbolic way, not in a literal way. So that's something that happened at 16 that it has definitely stayed with me for the course of my life. And I think that gets at the bigger societal issue that we have in America, where the lives of black men are treated as trivial things that if a black man dies at the hands of police due to improper actions or behavior, obviously the police are justified, is what people will say, because look at him, he was such a threat. But if you think about the story that I just told you, think back to 2009, where the first iPhone came out in 2007. That was like the big one that had a camera that a lot of people were starting to buy. Those are not everywhere yet. There are not a lot of cell phone cameras around yet. So let's say on that day I did die, there would have been no video footage of that happening, and the police would have been free to paint the narrative as they saw fit, and that narrative would have been, this man ran a red light. When we pulled him over, he got hostile. We feared for our lives. We had to shoot him. And that's the narrative that would have stuck, that they would have used to smear me and to get themselves off the hook for actions that were inordinate and were unnecessary for the situation at hand. And that's something I think about a lot. I think about the fact that I knew ahead of time when I got pulled over that anything you do could be misconstrued and could end up in you dying. And I knew that ahead of time because in the black community, we've known for years that police have killed people that didn't deserve to be killed. And those stories, whenever black people would tell them, would be brushed off as, we're making this up. Police wouldn't do that. Why are you saying that? But it wasn't until phone cameras they were everywhere. Every interaction could be recorded. That's the only time when the truth about these interactions that black people have had for decades and centuries, that's the only time when the public thought, okay, maybe there is something to this. Maybe the police actually are behaving in a way that's not correct for a given situation. And they're only doing that because it's a black person that they're interacting with. And I think about, like, what would a Fox News run at the time if I were killed and there was a public outrage? I know for a fact Fox News would have tried to find some picture of me where I was looking like a criminal or just looking intimidating, which they wouldn't have found because I didn't even have any social media presence at that time, not even a YouTube page in my name. But they would have found something. They would have probably tried to pull up my transcripts, which at the time, the only bad grade you would have seen on my transcript would have been from 3rd grade, and that was because I chose to not do an assignment, which was stupid. But you wouldn't have found anything bad about my name. You couldn't have interviewed someone at my school who would have given you a bad story, like, yeah, Elliot was violent or anything like that. So they had a hard time in spinning a narrative against my name. But at the same time, what they can always fall back on is what the officer says in that moment, is that I feared for my life. And anytime where there's an interaction between a police officer and a person of color, particularly male and a black male, and they say, I fear for my life, that's like taken as word handed out from God that that person obviously is not lying. They fear for their life. Therefore, anything they did after that moment is justified, which is obviously horseshit. And the reason I decided to share this story was because on Tuesday, the story of the video of, I think it's pronounced Ahmaud Arbery, was shown or was published by a radio station in Georgia where he was killed. And if I were you, I would not look up the video because it's very graphic, but it shows this car approaching this truck, and there's a black man running on the street, and there's a guy in the bed of the truck with a gun, and there's a guy with a shotgun who gets out of the car and approaches the black guy running, and they get into a scuffle over the gun. The guy with the shotgun shoots him, and he tries to run away, and he ends up collapsing and falling. Now, the context of this story is that the man running was jogging through a neighborhood that he was known to jog through. The people that stopped him claimed that he was attempting to burglarize a house, which they have no proof for. And it becomes more apparent what's happening in the situation when you read the 911 transcripts. And in those transcripts, the father, who is in the truck, the bed of the truck, he says that there's a black man running down my street, and the 911 dispatcher's like, okay, like, what's wrong? And He's like, I think he's trying to rob this house, but he doesn't really do a good job of really explaining why he needs the police there. The main thing is that there's a black man running down my street, which this was not a private street, it was a public street. Anyone can run down your street. And so instead of waiting to let the police come, he decides to get his gun. He tells his son gets his gun, and then they go chase this guy, basically. And they try and stop him, and that's when this whole thing happens. And the original, I think, district attorney who was assigned to the case wrote this terrible statement basically saying, like, well, in Georgia we can do citizens arrest, and they had rightful cause to try and arrest him. And then once the guy tried to fight for the gun, the person with the gun had a right to use that to defend themselves. But if you look at the original motive, they had no evidence that he was actually trying to burglarize a home. They didn't provide that over the 911 dispatch, and they didn't provide any evidence once the police showed up. But because we live in America, they were not arrested or held as more facts were gained. They were immediately let go. And it's just, like, it really pisses me off that we live in a country where, as black people, you always have to be on edge about what you're doing and how that can be perceived. And a great example of this is this weekend, Katie and I were driving around. We took this street that I felt like there were some like nice houses to look at. So we're just driving through that neighborhood. And that's something that, had I been alone, I would not have done by myself, because I'm always paranoid that someone will be looking out their window and call the police and say, oh, there's a black man driving around this neighborhood. I've never seen him before. I don't know what he's up to, and insinuate that I'm maybe casing the neighborhood. And that's, like, during this quarantine, I'm doing a lot of walking just to, like, relieve stress and get some physical activity. And I walk the same route every day, and there's always a thought in my mind is, just walk, don't look at any house, don't do anything that looks suspicious, because you never know who's looking, and you don't want them to call the police and say, yeah, I've seen this man walking through the neighborhood several times, I don't know what's going on. And then if a robbery does happen, guess who's going to be suspect number one? Probably me, because they'll think, oh, I called the police about this guy before, and maybe this is who you should look for. So I'm always in the position where I'm always conscious of what I'm doing and how other people can perceive me, because I never want to be perceived in such a way to have the police called. Because I know that in any interaction with the police, it's not, am I going to be arrested or not, or will I get a fine or not? It's, will I die in this interaction? And going back 9 years to what happened to me, or not 9 years, 11 years to what happened to me at 16, knowing the reality of that, and how my supposed running of a red light or of a stop sign got me pulled over and guns drawn, makes me dubious of any future interactions with police. So the whole reason for me telling that story is that I know for a fact that the conservative spin machine is going to wind up really fast and paint this guy as some monstrous villain who had it coming to him, and if he would have just cooperated with the citizen arrest by these armed people, then everything would have been okay and he would have lived. But you have to look at this situation from the point of view of a black person, which I know is very hard for many non-black Americans, because your perspective is so different from what we have to go through. But for those of you who know me personally, think about it from my perspective. Think about who you know me to be over the years that you've known me, and think about, is there a situation where you can see the police approaching Elliot with a gun? Or think about, is there any situation where you can see a concerned citizen, air quotes, concerned citizen, approaching Elliot with a gun and telling them that he's under citizen's arrest? That, I mean, it's just, black people at every turn have to live a lifestyle where you can't give anyone the benefit of the doubt to view you in a negative light. Because if you give them a shred of anything, a glimmer, they will spin it that way, and any hope for justice or any positive recognition your way just goes down the drain. Because America, for some reason, cannot get to the point that black people are people at the end of the day who deserve the same rights, considerations, benefit of the doubt that anyone else would. And it's something that eats at me, and it makes me concern for the future of having children, and in particular having a black son, knowing that he will enter a world that views him as a monster, that views him as something to be afraid of, views him as basically a nuclear bomb that can go off at any moment. So you have to take extreme caution around him. And that's very sickening. And I don't delight or look forward to having those conversations with him about how the world perceives you, and in turn, how you have to navigate the world so that you can live another day. And this is, if I have children who are not all the same skin color, if I have children who are more white passing, that's a conversation that I likely won't have to have with them in any manner. And that's just also a very harmful thing, that one of my children will have to walk and live in the world differently than their siblings, even though in the household they'll be raised the same, but once they leave the house, they have to leave it with different tools and different understanding of how they're going to be perceived. I know this is heavy and maybe not what people expect from me, because I'm generally like a lighthearted, jovial person, but this is like where the way the world perceives me and my internal identity and all those things, this is where they clash, and where I have to make it known that I walk through the world differently than many of you do. And I think a lot of the times that perspective is either one, not given, or two, not received well. And I think by me being the person that I am, being someone who doesn't have a criminal record, being someone that I don't think anyone could speak badly about, but yet I still had this type of interaction, I think it gives, and this is unfortunate, but it gives credence to the idea that maybe black people are treated unfairly in this country overall, and also by police. So yeah, that's it. This is like a part of my life that I don't mind sharing, but it's not something that I ever really intended to share with everyone, but there it is. Take for what you want, and if you ever have questions or if you have doubts about my story, you can feel free to contact me, but this is something that I would never lie about, because being caught lying like dumbass Jesse Smollett just makes things worse. So yeah, I'm gonna start rambling, so I'll end this video here. Peace. See you next time.